The bullet came through the window first. Glass exploded inward, glittering like rain under the chandelier, and Kael Rowan threw himself sideways, both hands locked over the swell of his belly. 6 months pregnant, vulnerable, alone in a penthouse that smelled like expensive cologne and old blood. The second shot never came. Just silence, heavy, waiting. Kael pressed his back against the wall, breathing hard, feeling his pulse hammer against his ribs. The baby kicked once, sharp and frantic, like it could sense the danger outside the thin barrier of his skin. This wasn't supposed to happen yet. He'd been married less than 4 hours. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. The man in the wheelchair, Riven Calder, Enigma, crime lord, husband, sat 15 feet away near the shattered window, utterly still. His silver-grey eyes tracked something in the darkness beyond the broken glass, calm as a predator deciding whether to strike or wait. Kael had expected cruelty tonight, maybe indifference, maybe something worse. He hadn't expected a sniper. "Stay down," Riven said, not loud, not harsh, just certain. Kael obeyed without thinking. His body moved before his mind caught up, Omega instincts screaming that this man, this Enigma, was safety even when nothing else made sense. It terrified him. He'd trusted an alpha once. Silas Brask had promised protection during Kael's heat, had marked him, had whispered forever into his neck while Kael burned and believed. Then Silas saw the pregnancy test and called him a liar. The Brask family had stripped Kael of his name, his protection, his future. They'd labeled him unstable, untrustworthy, a political liability. Then they'd gift-wrapped him for the Calders like garbage with a bow on top. A pregnant Omega, discarded, disposable. The perfect insult to a rival syndicate. Kael's hands shook as he pressed them harder against his stomach, feeling the curve of life he'd fought to protect for months. The baby wasn't Riven's, everyone knew. The entire underworld had whispered about it during the ceremony, voices dripping with mockery and pity. A crippled boss and a used Omega. How long before the Calder line dies out? This isn't a marriage, it's a mercy killing. Kael had stood at that altar in a tailored suit that hid nothing, shame burning through him like acid, and said vows he didn't believe. Riven had said his vows too, quietly, firmly, with something in his voice that sounded almost like intent. Kael hadn't understood it then. He still didn't. Footsteps pounded in the hallway outside, guards finally responding, too slow, too late. Riven didn't move, didn't flinch, just kept watching the window with that unnerving calm, fingers drumming once against the armrest of his wheelchair. "Sir," a guard burst through the door, weapon drawn, scanning the room with wild eyes. 2 more followed, forming a barrier between Riven and the broken glass. "Rooftop," Riven said, "northwest corner, he's already gone." The lead guard hesitated. "You saw?" "I saw," Riven's voice dropped lower, colder, "and I know who sent him." Kael's breath caught, the baby kicked again, harder this time, and a sharp cramp twisted through his lower back. Stress, fear. His doctor had warned him, too much adrenaline, too much cortisol, and his body might decide 6 months was close enough. "Get Kael somewhere safe," Riven continued, still not looking away from the window. "Medical suite, full lockdown. No one gets in without my voice confirmation." The guard nodded and turned toward Kael, but Kael couldn't move. His legs felt welded to the floor, muscles locked tight with the kind of terror that didn't care about logic or orders. Riven finally looked at him. Those silver-grey eyes cut across the room, sharp and assessing, and Kael felt the weight of them like a physical touch. Enigmas didn't need to raise their voices. Their presence alone bent reality, made alphas kneel and omegas submit without a single word spoken. "You're safe," Riven said. 2 words, that was all. But Kael's body believed them even when his mind screamed lies. His muscles unlocked, his breathing slowed, the cramping in his back eased just enough to let him stand. "Move," the guard urged, reaching for Kael's arm. Kael moved. He let them guide him out of the penthouse, away from the shattered glass and the ghost of a bullet that should have killed him. His last glimpse of Riven showed a man still seated, still calm, still watching the city like he owned every shadow in it. Maybe he did. Kael's previous alpha, Silas, had ruled through noise and fists and threats. He'd been loud, violent, obvious. Everyone had feared him. Everyone had also underestimated him. Riven ruled through silence. And as the guards escorted Kael down a private elevator lined with mirrors that showed him pale and shaking, and 6 months too pregnant to run, one thought kept circling through his head. The sniper hadn't been random. Someone wanted him dead. Someone wanted his baby erased. And Riven had known exactly where to look. Who ordered this hit, and why does Riven already know? Kael had been beautiful once. Not in the way Omegas were supposed to be, soft and delicate and easy to forget. He'd been sharp, clever, the kind of beautiful that made people pause and reconsider their assumptions. The Brask family had noticed. That was the problem. Kael sat in the medical suite now, white walls pressing in on all sides, a monitor strapped to his belly tracking the baby's heartbeat. Steady, strong, alive despite everything. The nurse had checked his vitals twice, muttered something about elevated stress levels, and left him alone with orders to rest. Rest? As if he'd slept more than 3 hours at a time since Silas had looked at him and said, "That's not mine." Kael's hands curled into fists against his thighs. The fabric of his suit, expensive, tailored, borrowed, felt wrong on his skin. Everything felt wrong. This room, this building, this marriage. He'd belonged to the Brask Dominion for 2 years before the pregnancy. Belonged, that was the word they'd used. Not employed, not protected, belonged. Like property. Like something breakable. Kael had been brought in as a political asset after his father's gambling debts spiraled too high for any legitimate business to ignore. The Brasks had offered a deal. Work off the debt, keep the family alive, stay useful. Kael had stayed useful. He'd managed their books, scrubbed their money clean, learned which questions not to ask when bodies showed up in places they shouldn't. He'd been good at it, good enough that Silas Brask, heir alpha untouchable, had started paying attention. "You're smart," Silas had told him once, cornering him in an empty office after midnight. "Most Omegas I meet are too scared to think." Kael should have recognized the danger then. He hadn't. Silas had been charming, patient. He'd asked questions, listened to answers, made Kael feel like more than a transaction. And when Kael's heat had hit early, unexpected, brutal, 3 days of agony that left him incoherent, Silas had been there. "I'll take care of you," Silas had promised, voice rough against Kael's throat. And Kael had believed him. The heat had burned through rational thought, left nothing but instinct and need, and the desperate trust Omegas felt toward alphas who offered protection during vulnerability. Silas had marked him, bitten deep into the curve where neck met shoulder, breaking skin, sealing a bond that wasn't supposed to be broken. Kael still felt it sometimes, a ghost ache, a scar that never quite healed. When the heat faded and clarity returned, Silas had smiled, kissed Kael's forehead, told him everything would be different now. It had been different. For 6 weeks. Then Kael missed his cycle, took a test, saw 2 lines that changed everything. He'd been nervous telling Silas, excited too, terrified. The bond mark on his neck had still been fresh, pink and raised, proof of claim and responsibility. Silas had stared at the test for a long time. "You're sure?" he'd finally asked. "Yes." "How far along?" 6 weeks, maybe 7. Silas had set the test down carefully, too carefully, like it might explode. "That's not mine." 3 words, that was all it took. Kael's world had shattered quietly. No screaming, no violence, just cold, absolute denial. "You marked me," Kael had said, voice small. "During my heat, you promised." "I don't remember that." Lie, they both knew it was a lie, but lies didn't matter when power was unequal. Silas's family controlled everything: money, influence, fear. Kael's family controlled nothing except debt. Within a week, the Brasks had spun a new story. Kael was unstable, delusional. He'd seduced Silas during heat and now claimed a bond that never existed. The pregnancy, obviously someone else's. Kael had always been too friendly with the guards, too comfortable around the other alphas. Slander was easy when the victim had no voice. Kael had tried to fight, showed medical records, pointed to the mark still healing on his neck, begged Silas to tell the truth. Silas had looked through him like glass. "Remove him," he told his guards. They had. Kael had spent 2 weeks locked in a basement room, pregnant and alone, while the Brasks decided what to do with him. He'd heard them arguing through the walls. Silas wanted him gone, disappeared, erased. Silas's father, practical, ruthless, had suggested something worse. "Give him to the Calders." A peace offering, a strategic move. The Calder syndicate had been growing too bold, encroaching on Brask territory, making threats that couldn't be ignored. A marriage alliance would ease tensions without costing anything real. And a pregnant Omega no one wanted. Perfect insult disguised as diplomacy. Riven Calder had accepted. Kael still didn't know why. The wheelchair had been the first shock. Riven was supposed to be dangerous, powerful, the kind of enigma who made alphas nervous just by existing. Instead, he'd rolled into the negotiation, meeting looking calm and controlled and broken in a way that made people whisper. An assassination attempt 6 months ago had left him unable to walk. Or so everyone believed. Kael had seen him at the altar today, silver-grey eyes sharp despite the wheelchair, presence filling the room even while seated. He'd watched Kael approach, expression unreadable, and something in Kael's chest had twisted. Not attraction, not exactly. Recognition. This man knew what it felt like to be underestimated. The ceremony had been brief, brutal, no romance, no pretense, just vows spoken in front of witnesses who smirked and whispered and waited for the whole thing to collapse. Riven's voice had been steady. Kael's had cracked twice. And now, hours later, someone had tried to kill him. The door to the medical suite opened. Kael flinched, hand flying to his belly, but it was just one of Riven's guards, tall, silent, expressionless. "Boss wants to see you." Kael's throat tightened. Now. He followed because he had no choice. The hallways were empty, sterile, lined with doors that probably hid things Kael didn't want to know about. They took an elevator down, then down again, descending into the parts of the building where legitimate business didn't happen. The guard stopped outside a reinforced door and knocked twice. "Come in," Riven's voice called. Kael stepped inside. Riven sat behind a desk, wheelchair positioned precisely, papers spread in front of him like a battlefield map. He glanced up when Kael entered, eyes flicking once to the hands still pressed protectively over the baby, then back to Kael's face. "Sit," Riven said. Kael sat. The sniper was Brask, Riven continued, no preamble. Marcus Webb, former military, he's been on their peril for 3 years. Kael's breath stopped. Silas sent him, Riven added, to tie up loose ends. The words landed like blows. Kael had known, somewhere deep and terrible, that Silas wouldn't just let him go. But hearing it confirmed, hearing it spoken aloud, made it real in a way that turned his stomach. "He wants me dead," Kael whispered. "He wants the child dead," Riven corrected. "You're just collateral." Kael's vision blurred. He blinked hard, refusing to cry in front of this man he didn't know, this enigma who'd married him for reasons Kael still couldn't understand. "I won't let that happen," Riven said quietly. Kael looked up, meeting those silver-grey eyes. "Why?" Riven leaned back slightly, fingers drumming once against the desk. "Because no one discards what's mine." The possessiveness should have frightened Kael. It didn't. Outside the office, in the cold hallways of a syndicate built on violence and control, Silas Brask was making plans. And Riven was already 3 steps ahead. The wedding had been a spectacle. Not the good kind. Kael had walked down an aisle lined with faces that ranged from amused to disgusted, every step a reminder that he was the punchline to a joke he hadn't asked to be part of. The venue was expensive, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, enough flowers to fill a funeral, but the atmosphere was cold. Hostile. Waiting for failure. At the end of the aisle, Riven Calder sat in his wheelchair, perfectly still. He wore a black suit tailored to precision, silver cufflinks catching the light, dark hair swept back from a face that gave away nothing. Handsome in the way dangerous things were, sharp edges, controlled power, the kind of beauty that made you forget to breathe until it was too late. Kael had stopped 3 feet away, hands pressed over the swell of his belly, and tried not to shake. The officiant cleared his throat. "We are gathered here." "Skip it," Riven interrupted. His voice was quiet but absolute. "The vows." The officiant blinked, flustered. "Sir, the ceremony requires." "The vows," Riven repeated. The room went silent. Kael felt the weight of it, dozens of eyes watching, waiting for humiliation, expecting this marriage to crumble before it even began. He'd spent 2 weeks preparing for this moment, rehearsing words that meant nothing, bracing for rejection. "Kael Rowan," Riven said, looking directly at him, not through him, at him. Do you take me as your husband, knowing what I am and what this makes you? Honest, blunt, no pretense. Kael's throat closed, he managed a nod. I do. Say it aloud. I do, Kael repeated, voice stronger this time. Riven's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those silver-grey eyes. Approval maybe, or calculation. I take you as my husband, Riven continued, still holding Kael's gaze. Everything you carry, seen and unseen, is under my protection now. That includes the child. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Kael froze, his hand moved instinctively to his belly, fingers spreading protectively over the curve. No one had acknowledged the pregnancy during negotiations. It had been the unspoken shame, the reason this marriage was an insult instead of an alliance. Riven just claimed it. Publicly. I will not deny what others have, Riven said, and though his voice stayed calm, the force behind it pressed against the room like atmospheric pressure before a storm. This child will have my name, my resources, my protection. Anyone who threatens it answers to me. Kael's vision blurred. He blinked hard, refusing to cry, but his chest felt too tight to breathe. The officiant stammered through the rest. Rings were exchanged, simple bands, no stones, functional. When it came time for the kiss, Riven leaned forward slightly but stopped short, giving Kael space to close the distance or refuse. Kael closed it. Brief, chaste, oppressive lips that meant everything and nothing. Husband, Riven murmured against his mouth. Husband, Kael echoed. The crowd erupted into polite applause that felt like mockery. Kael heard the whispers immediately. He's just protecting his reputation. Give it 3 months before he throws the Omega out. The Calders are desperate if they're accepting Brask's trash. Kael had heard worse. He'd survived worse. But something about the cruelty in this room, the casual dismissal, the assumption that he was worthless, made his hands shake. Riven noticed. He reached out, not toward Kael's belly like most alphas would, but toward Kael's wrist. His fingers circled carefully, thumb pressing against Kael's racing pulse. Breathe, Riven said, too quiet for anyone else to hear. Kael breathed. They'd been escorted to the penthouse after the reception. No fanfare, no celebration, just guards flanking them on both sides, elevator rising in silence, Riven's wheelchair gliding across polished floors, while Kael walked beside him feeling like a prisoner being transferred between cells. The penthouse was beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, furniture that cost more than Kael's father's entire debt, art on the walls that probably had histories Kael didn't want to know. This is yours now, Riven had said, gesturing broadly. All of it. Kael hadn't known what to do with that. He'd stood in the center of the room, hands still pressed over his belly, and tried to process the fact that his life had just changed completely. For better or worse remained to be seen. Guards outside, Riven had continued, rolling toward the windows. 2 at the elevator, 1 monitoring building access. You're safe here. Safe, that word again. Kael had wanted to believe it. Then the window shattered. Now, standing in Riven's office hours later with the knowledge that Silas had sent an assassin, Kael felt the last of his composure crack. Why did you claim the baby? The question burst out before Kael could stop it. During the vows, you didn't have to do that. Riven regarded him steadily. Would you have preferred I didn't? I know, Kael struggled for words. You don't know if it's even healthy, the pregnancy. I've had complications. Stress, the doctor said. I don't care. Kael stopped. What? I don't care if the child has complications, Riven said evenly. I don't care who the biological father is. I don't care what the Brasks think or what my rivals whisper. You're my husband, that makes the child mine. It was the most anyone had said about the pregnancy, without flinching in months. Kael's eyes burned. He looked away, blinking hard, focusing on the papers spread across Riven's desk. Maps, names, photographs of people Kael vaguely recognized from Brask territory. You're planning something, Kael said. I'm always planning something. Against Silas. Riven's fingers drummed once against the desk. Silas made his choice when he sent that sniper. Now I make mine. What choice? Riven looked at him for a long moment, silver-grey eyes unreadable. Then he smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't kind. It was the smile of a predator that had just decided how the hunt would end. Whether he dies quickly, Riven said softly, or slowly. Kael should have been horrified. He wasn't. Outside, in the city where power shifted like tides and violence was currency, the Brask Dominion prepared for war. They didn't know they'd already lost. Riven's revenge wouldn't be loud, it would be complete. The penthouse felt different when Kael returned. Colder, emptier, the broken window had been replaced, glass pristine and smooth like the attack never happened. But Kael could still see the fragments scattered across the floor in his mind, still feel the way his body had moved on instinct, protecting the baby first, himself second. Always second. He stood in the center of the room now, alone, hands pressed over his belly where the baby kicked lazy patterns against his palm. 6 months, halfway. The doctor had warned him the next trimester would be hardest. More weight, more pressure, more risk if stress levels didn't stabilize. Kael was married to a crime lord. Stress wasn't going anywhere. The door opened. Kael flinched before he could stop himself, shoulders tensing, but it was just Riven. Wheelchair rolling smooth across the hardwood, expression calm, those silver-grey eyes tracking Kael with the same careful attention he'd shown since the ceremony. "You didn't eat," Riven observed. Kael glanced at the table near the windows where food had been left, untouched, cold, probably delicious if his stomach wasn't twisted in knots. "I'm not hungry." "You're eating for 2. "I'm aware." Riven rolled closer, stopping a few feet away, not crowding, not threatening, just present. "When's the last time you had a full meal?" Kael couldn't remember, days maybe. The Brasks had fed him, enough to keep him functional but not comfortable. He'd learned to eat quickly, quietly, never asking for seconds. "I'll eat later," Kael said. "You'll eat now." It wasn't a command, not quite, but there was something in Riven's voice, firm, unyielding, that made Kael's Omega instincts straighten and pay attention. "I don't take orders well," Kael said, though his voice came out weaker than intended. Riven's mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. "Good, I don't want a husband who does." That stopped Kael cold. Husband, the word still felt foreign. Wrong, like wearing someone else's clothes that didn't quite fit. Riven gestured toward the couch. "Sit, I'll bring the food to you." "You don't have to." "I know." Kael sat because his legs were tired and his back ached, and he didn't have the energy to argue. Riven maneuvered his wheelchair with practiced ease, collecting plates from the table, balancing them carefully across his lap as he rolled back. "Chicken," Riven said, setting a plate in front of Kael. "Vegetables, bread, nothing spicy." The kitchen was informed about Omega dietary needs during pregnancy. Kael stared at the food. It looked good, smelled better. His stomach twisted with hunger and nausea in equal measure. "I didn't ask for special treatment." "You didn't have to." "I'm not," Kael's throat tightened. "I'm not some fragile thing that needs to be handled carefully." Riven leaned back slightly, watching him. "I know." "Then why?" "Because you deserve it anyway." The words landed like stones. Kael's eyes burned. He looked away, blinking hard, focusing on the food instead of the dangerous warmth spreading through his chest. He picked up the fork, took a bite. The chicken was tender, seasoned perfectly, and Kael's body responded with desperate hunger he'd been ignoring for too long. He ate. Riven watched in silence, not judging, not commenting, just present. When Kael finished half the plate, more than he'd eaten in days, he set the fork down carefully. "Thank you. You don't need to thank me for basic care." The Brasks, Kael stopped, started again. "I'm not used to this." "I know," Riven said quietly. "That's going to change." Kael wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that this marriage might be different, that Riven's claim during the vows had been real instead of strategic. But trust was expensive. And Kael had already paid too much for it once. "What do you want from me?" The question came out raw, honest, the kind of vulnerability Kael had learned to hide. Really, not the political answer, not the syndicate reasons. What do you actually want? Riven was quiet for a long time. Then he rolled closer, close enough that Kael could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through dark hair, the way exhaustion lived in his shoulders despite the calm exterior. "I want you to stop expecting cruelty," Riven said. Kael's breath caught. "I want you to sleep without nightmares," Riven continued. "I want that baby to be born healthy. I want Silas Brask to understand what it costs to discard someone under my protection." "That's a lot of wants." "I'm a greedy man." Despite everything, Kael almost smiled. almost. I don't know how to do this, he admitted. Be married, be safe. I don't, his voice cracked. I don't know how to trust alphas anymore. I'm not an alpha. Enigmas are worse. Riven's expression shifted, something that might have been amusement if his eyes weren't so sharp. Fair. Kael's hands pressed tighter over his belly. The baby kicked, strong and insistent, reminding him why he'd survived this long. Not for himself, for this life he carried that hadn't asked to be born into chaos. I need you to understand something, Kael said carefully. I'm not going to fall in love with you just because you're kind. I'm not going to be grateful and obedient and easy. I've been through too much for that. Good, Riven said immediately. Kael blinked. Good. I don't want obedience, I want a partner. Partners are equals. Yes. I'm 6 months pregnant with another man's child. No resources, no family, no leverage. We're not equals. Riven leaned forward slightly, silver-grey eyes locking onto Kael's with an intensity that made breathing difficult. You survived the Brasks, Riven said quietly. You protected that child through denial, isolation, and active attempts to break you. You walked down that aisle today knowing everyone thought you were worthless, and you did it anyway. You're stronger than half the alphas in my organization. Kael's throat closed. No one had said anything like that to him, ever. So yes, Riven continued, we're equals, and if you don't believe that yet, I'll prove it to you. Kael didn't know what to say. His hands shook against his belly, emotions too big and complicated to name pressing against his ribs. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. Kael glanced at it automatically, a number he didn't recognize. He should have ignored it, should have deleted it. He opened it instead. The message was short, 3 words. You were warned. Kael's blood turned to ice. What is it? Riven asked sharply. Kael showed him the phone, watched Riven's expression shift from calm to something colder, harder, absolute. When did this come through? Just now. Riven took the phone, scrolling quickly, eyes scanning. This number is registered to a burner, purchased yesterday, Brask territory. Sailors, Kael whispered. Yes. The room felt too small suddenly, too exposed. Kael stood on shaking legs, backing toward the wall, hands locked over his belly. He's not going to stop, Kael said. He's going to keep trying until I stop him first, Riven interrupted. You can't just. Yes, I can. Riven's voice was flat, certain, and Kael recognized the tone. He'd heard it before in Silas's voice when decisions were made that couldn't be undone. What are you going to do? Kael asked. Riven met his eyes. Whatever's necessary. Outside the penthouse, 19 floors below, a car pulled up to the building entrance. The driver didn't get out. He was waiting for orders that would never come. The attack had been planned for 3 days. Kael didn't know that. Riven did. The sniper, Marcus Webb, had been hired by Silas Brask with explicit instructions. Eliminate the Omega. Make it look random, don't leave evidence. Webb had been good at his job. Military trained, 43 confirmed kills, a reputation for clean work. He'd accepted the contract without questions. That was his first mistake. His second mistake was assuming Riven Calder was actually crippled. Now Webb sat in an unmarked room 3 levels below the penthouse, wrists zip-tied to a chair, blood crusting under his nose, from where Riven's guards had been less than gentle during extraction. Riven rolled into the room at exactly midnight. No theatrics, no dramatic entrance, just the quiet glide of wheelchair wheels and the heavy click of the door locking behind him. Webb looked up, eyes tracking Riven with the wariness of a man who'd miscalculated badly. Comfortable? Riven asked. Go to hell. Riven stopped a few feet away, studying Webb the way someone might study an insect under glass. Interesting, ultimately insignificant. You missed, Riven said. Webb's jaw tightened. I don't miss. You did tonight. I wasn't aiming to miss. I know. Silence stretched between them. Webb shifted in the chair, testing the restraints, finding them secure. His breathing was controlled, trained response, keeping panic at bay through discipline. Silas Brask hired you, Riven continued, not a question. Webb said nothing. To kill my husband. Still nothing. Riven's fingers drummed once against the armrest. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me every detail of your contract with Brask, payment, timeline instructions, contingency plans. Then you're going to contact him and tell him the job is done. Webb laughed, harsh, bitter. You think I'm stupid enough to? I think you're smart enough to understand the alternative. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Webb's laugh died. I'm not afraid of you, Webb said, but his voice wavered slightly. Riven leaned forward, not far, just enough. You should be. Something in the air shifted. Pressure. Weight. The kind of presence that made alphas kneel and betas freeze, and even trained killers reconsider their life choices. Enigma dominance didn't roar. It didn't need to. Webb's body responded before his mind caught up, shoulders dropping, head tilting slightly, instinct screaming submission even while his pride fought back. I'm not telling you anything, Webb forced out through gritted teeth. Yes, Riven said calmly, you are. He gestured once, the door opened. 2 guards entered, one carrying a laptop, the other a small black case. We can do this easy, Riven said as the laptop was set up in front of Webb, screen glowing. You cooperate, provide evidence, testify against Brask if necessary. In exchange, you live. New identity, relocation, a chance to disappear. Webb's eyes flicked to the black case, and if I don't? Then we discuss the less pleasant options. The guard opened the case. Inside, syringes, vials, instruments that had no place in polite conversation. I don't torture for fun, Riven clarified, but I will torture for information that protects my family. Webb's face paled. Your family, he's been your husband for less than a day. Which means he's been my family for less than a day, Riven interrupted. The duration doesn't change the fact. You tried to kill him. You tried to kill his child. That makes you my problem. The kid isn't even yours. It is now. Webb stared at him, searching for cracks, for weakness, for anything that suggested this was a bluff. He found nothing. Fine, Webb said finally, voice flat with defeat. I'll talk. It took 40 minutes for Webb to provide every detail. The contract had been negotiated through an intermediary, clean hands, plausible deniability. Payment was $50,000 up front, $50,000 on completion. Silas wanted proof, photos, time-stamped, showing the body. He wanted the Omega and the baby both, Webb said quietly. Made it clear, no survivors. Riven listened without expression. The guards transcribed everything, recording, documenting, building a case that would destroy Silas piece by piece. When Webb finished, Riven leaned back slightly. Send the message, he said. Webb's hands shook as he typed on the laptop, composing a text to Silas confirming the job was complete. Photos attached, staged, altered, showing damage that looked convincing if you didn't look too close. The message sent. 3 minutes later, a response came through. Good, burn the evidence, payment transferred. Riven read it twice, then he smiled. It was the coldest expression Webb had ever seen. Thank you for your cooperation, Riven said. What happens now? Webb asked. Now you disappear. New name, new city, new life. My people will handle the details. Riven paused. But if I ever hear your name again, if you ever come near my family, there won't be a second conversation. Webb nodded, relief and terror mixing on his face. The guards escorted him out. Riven sat alone in the empty room, laptop screen still glowing with Silas's confession. Burn the evidence. Payment transferred. Proof of murder for hire, proof of intent, proof that would hold up in underworld court and legal court both. Silas had just signed his own death warrant. Upstairs in the penthouse, Kael woke from a nightmare he couldn't remember. His hands flew to his belly, checking, confirming, making sure the baby was still there, still moving. The kicks came immediately, strong and insistent, and Kael's breathing slowed. The room was dark except for city lights filtering through windows, empty except for him. Riven was somewhere in the building, handling things Kael probably didn't want to know about. Kael's phone sat on the nightstand, still no new messages, but the last one, you were warned, glowed in his memory like a brand. He should have been terrified. He was. But underneath the fear, something else stirred, something that felt almost like hope. Riven had said he'd stop Silas. And everything Kael had learned about Enigmas suggested that when they made promises, they kept them. Absolutely. Lethally. Without mercy. Kael pressed his hand over his belly and whispered to the baby, "We might actually survive this." 19 floors below, the car that had been waiting at the entrance finally drove away. The driver never made his report, because Riven's people had already intercepted him. The wheelchair crashed backward into the wall. Metal cracked against plaster, loud enough to make every alpha in the room freeze. Kael's scream caught in his throat as Riven rose, not struggled, not dragged himself up, rose to his full height like he'd been waiting his entire life for this exact moment. 6'3", broad shoulders, presence that filled the room and pushed against everyone's lungs until breathing felt like a privilege he granted. The guards dropped to their knees. All of them. Instinct, pure Enigma dominance rolling off Riven in waves that made Kael's Omega biology slam into overdrive. Safety, protection, power, mine. His legs went weak. He grabbed the edge of the couch, barely staying upright, eyes locked on the man who'd been pretending to be broken for months. "Sir," one guard gasped, forehead pressed to the floor. Riven didn't acknowledge him. His eyes were fixed on the shattered window, on the city beyond, calculating trajectories and distances, and exactly who'd made the mistake of trying to kill what belonged to him. "Northwest rooftop," Riven said, voice calm and absolute. "Marcus Webb, former military, hired 3 days ago by Silas Brask." He turned, those silver-grey eyes cutting through the chaos. "Bring him to me alive." "Yes, sir." The guards scrambled up, moving fast, desperate to please. Kael couldn't move, couldn't think. His hands pressed over his belly where the baby kicked frantic patterns, sensing the shift in power, the way reality had just bent around one man's will. "You," Kael's voice cracked, "you were never hurt." Riven looked at him, really looked, and for the first time since the ceremony, Kael saw something raw in those eyes, not cruelty, not indifference. Purpose. "The assassination attempt was real," Riven said, walking toward him with smooth, controlled steps that proved every rumor had been a lie. 6 months ago, 3 bullets, close range. 1 grazed my spine." He stopped in front of Kael, close enough to touch but not touching. "The paralysis lasted 2 weeks," Riven continued. "After that I could walk again, I chose not to." Kael's mind raced, trying to process. Why? Because weak men make mistakes, they get comfortable, they reveal themselves. Riven's expression hardened. "I needed to know who'd betray me when they thought I couldn't fight back." "And did they?" 7 syndicate heads, 12 of my own men, 43 external contracts attempting to finish what the first shooter started. Riven's jaw tightened, all documented, all waiting for the right moment. "This moment," Kael whispered. "Yes." The baby kicked hard. Sharp enough to make Kael wince. Riven's eyes dropped to Kael's belly, then back to his face. "You should sit." "I'm fine." "You're shaking." Kael was. His whole body trembled with adrenaline and shock, and the overwhelming presence of an Enigma who'd just proven every story about his power had been an understatement. "I don't understand," Kael said. "You let everyone think you were broken. For months, why tell the truth now?" Riven's expression shifted into something that might have been a smile, if it wasn't so cold. "Because Silas just tried to murder my husband," he said quietly, "and that requires a response." Kael's chest tightened. What kind of response? "The kind that ends bloodlines." Outside in the dark city, Marcus Webb was being dragged from a rooftop by men who moved like shadows. He tried to run. They were faster. Back in the penthouse, Kael sank onto the couch, legs finally giving out. Riven moved to the windows, standing in full view now, no longer hiding, posture radiating controlled violence. "How long have you been planning this?" Kael asked. "Since the moment the Brasks offered you as a peace treaty." Kael's breath stopped. "What?" Riven turned, silver-grey eyes sharp. "Did you think I accepted their offer because I needed a husband? Because I was desperate?" He laughed, harsh and humorless. "I accepted because Silas Brask is a coward who abandons pregnant Omegas, and cowards make enemies poorly." "So I was." Kael's throat closed. "I was bait." "No." Riven crossed the room in 3 strides, kneeling in front of Kael with a grace that made every alpha's earlier submission look clumsy. "You were proof." "Of what?" "That the Brasks are exactly as corrupt as I needed them to be." Kael stared at him, trying to understand, trying to reconcile the man who'd claimed his baby during vows with the man who'd orchestrated months of deception. "You used me," Kael said. "Yes." The honesty was brutal. Kael flinched. "But not the way you think," Riven added. His hand moved slow, careful, giving Kael time to pull away, and settled over Kael's where it pressed against his belly. "I needed evidence that Silas would rather kill than take responsibility. I needed the underworld to see it. Hiring that sniper, that was his mistake, not mine." "You knew he'd try." "I counted on it." Kael's vision blurred. Anger and fear and something else. Something that felt like betrayal, except he'd never trusted Riven enough to be betrayed. "What happens now?" Kael asked. Riven's thumb brushed across Kael's knuckles, gentle despite the violence humming under his skin. "Now Silas learns what it costs to threaten my family." "Family?" The word landed like a brand. Kael pulled his hand away. "I'm not your family, I'm a transaction. You said it yourself, I was proof." "You were," Riven agreed. "Now you're more." "Why? Because we signed papers. Because you claimed a baby that isn't yours. Because you survived." Riven's voice dropped lower, intensity burning through every syllable. "Because you protected that child through hell. Because when you walked down that aisle today, you didn't break. That's worth more than blood." Kael's hands shook. The baby kicked again, rolling against his palm like it could sense the conversation, the shift, the moment everything changed. "I don't know how to believe you," Kael whispered. "Then watch," Riven said, "and decide for yourself." He stood, moving toward the door where guards waited with updates, with captured snipers, with evidence that would shatter the Brask empire. Kael sat alone in the aftermath, hands pressed over his belly, mind racing. Riven had lied about the wheelchair. What else had he lied about? Or worse, what else was still true? 48 hours later, Silas Brask's world began to collapse. The evidence hit the underworld like a bomb at dawn. Medical records, financial transfers, testimony from Marcus Webb detailing the contract, the payment, the explicit instructions to eliminate Kael and the unborn child, transcripts of messages between Silas and the intermediary, proof of 3 other Omegas Silas had bonded during Heat and later denied, 1 dead, 2 vanished, all buried under legal threats and syndicate power. Riven released it everywhere. Dark web forums where crime families traded information like currency, legitimate news outlets that covered organized crime, anonymous tips to federal investigators who'd been trying to crack Brask operations for years. The Brasks tried to contain it. They failed. By noon, Silas's father, Darius Brask, patriarch ruthless strategist, called an emergency syndicate meeting. By evening, Silas was stripped of his rank and locked in a private holding cell while the family decided whether execution or exile would do less damage to their reputation. Kael watched it unfold from Riven's office, standing behind the desk where monitors displayed real-time updates. News feeds, encrypted channels, messages flooding in from allies and enemies both, everyone scrambling to distance themselves from the Brasks before the implosion took them down too. "He's finished," Riven said, leaning against the desk beside Kael. "Standing, always standing now. Darius won't protect him. Too much exposure, too much proof." Kael stared at the screen showing Silas's face, younger photo, before the cruelty had settled into permanent lines around his mouth. The man who'd promised forever and delivered abandonment. "I thought I'd feel different," Kael admitted, watching him fall. "How do you feel?" "Empty." Riven nodded. "Revenge doesn't fill holes, it just stops the bleeding." Kael's hand moved to his belly automatically. The baby had been quiet today, resting, the doctor said, conserving energy. Normal for this stage. But Kael still checked constantly, still needed the reassurance of movement. "What happens to the others?" Kael asked. "The other Omegas he found," Riven interrupted. "Alive, 2 of them, the third," he paused. "We were too late." Kael's chest tightened. "Dead." "Suicide, 3 years ago, after Silas denied her twins and had her committed to a psychiatric facility." Riven's jaw clenched. "I've arranged reparations for her family, and prosecution for the doctors who falsified her records." "That won't bring her back." "No, but it's something." Kael turned away from the monitors, unable to look at the evidence anymore. The room felt too small suddenly, too close. He moved to the windows overlooking the city, daylight now bright and clean, hiding all the violence underneath. "The other 2 Omegas," Kael said carefully, Will they testify? One already has federal case, the other is considering. Riven moved beside him, close but not touching. I've offered protection either way, new identities if they want them, resources, whatever they need. Why? Because Silas doesn't get to walk away from this. Kael looked at him, really looked. Riven stood with perfect posture, shoulders back, presence controlled but absolute. No sign of the wheelchair, no pretense of weakness. You're not doing this for justice, Kael said quietly. You're doing it because he tried to kill me. Both things can be true. But which one matters more? Riven met his eyes. Does it change the outcome? It changes whether I can trust your reasons. Then trust this, Riven said. Silas Brask denied 4 Omegas and their children. One is dead because of it. The others live with trauma that doesn't heal. If he'd only tried to kill you, I would have destroyed him. But knowing he's done this before, knowing he'll do it again if he's allowed, Riven's expression hardened. That's not revenge, that's removing a threat. Kael wanted to argue, wanted to find fault in the logic, in the cold calculation that treated lives like chess pieces. He couldn't, because Riven was right. Men like Silas didn't stop, they escalated, and every Omega they touched paid the price while the world looked away. What happens now? Kael asked. Now the Brasks decide Silas's fate, execution or exile. Either way he loses everything, name, power, protection. And us. Riven's expression softened slightly. We wait. For what? For you to feel safe enough to sleep through the night, for the baby to be born healthy, for you to stop flinching when I move too fast. He paused, for however long it takes. Kael's throat tightened. The kindness was almost worse than cruelty. He knew how to survive cruelty. Kindness made him hope, and hope was dangerous. I'm still afraid of you, Kael admitted. Good, fear keeps you smart. I don't mean, Kael struggled for words. I'm not afraid you'll hurt me physically. I'm afraid you'll make me believe this is real, and then I'll wake up and find out it was another transaction. Riven turned fully toward him, silver-grey eyes serious. I can't promise you'll never be hurt, he said. I can't promise this life won't be violent or complicated or dangerous. But I can promise you'll never be discarded. Not by me, not while I'm breathing. Kael's hands pressed over his belly. The baby kicked once, gentle, like it could hear the conversation. I don't know how to do this, Kael whispered. Be married, be protected. I don't know what you expect. I expect you to heal, Riven interrupted. Everything else is optional. The words settled between them like a contract. Not romantic, not flowery, just honest in a way that made Kael's chest ache. Outside the office, footsteps approached. A guard knocked once. Sir, the Brask delegation is here. Riven's expression shifted instantly, calm to cold, controlled to lethal. Send them in. Kael tensed. Should I? Stay, Riven said. They need to see you alive. The door opened. 3 men entered, Brask enforcers, expensive suits, expressions carefully neutral. The laid one was older, grey-haired, someone Kael vaguely recognized from the Dominion. Mr. Calder, the man said, nodding respectfully, too respectfully, fear disguised as courtesy. Marcus, Riven acknowledged. I assume you're here on Darius's behalf. Yes, sir, the Patriarch wishes to extend his. Marcus's eyes flicked to Kael, then away. His apologies for the unfortunate incident involving your husband. Unfortunate incident, Riven repeated flatly. Is that what we're calling attempted murder now? Marcus's face paled. Sir, I assure you the family had no knowledge. The family hired the sniper. Silas acted alone, without authorization. Darius has already. I don't care what Darius has already done, Riven said, voice dropping to something that made the air itself feel heavier. Your Patriarch's son tried to kill a pregnant Omega under my protection. That requires more than apologies. Marcus swallowed hard. What would you consider appropriate recompense? Silas's life. The room went silent. Sir, Marcus said carefully, Darius is willing to negotiate. I'm not negotiating, I'm telling you the cost. Silas Brask dies, publicly, with full acknowledgement of his crimes, or the Calder Syndicate goes to war with the Brasks, and we both know how that ends. Marcus's hands trembled slightly. I'll convey your terms. Do that. The Brask delegation left quickly, practically fleeing, and Kael released a breath he hadn't known he was holding. Will they agree? He asked. Yes, Riven said. Darius loves power more than he loves his son. He'll sacrifice Silas to save the Dominion. And if he doesn't? Riven's smile was cold and certain. Then I'll take everything from him piece by piece until there's nothing left. 3 days later, Silas Brask was executed by his own family. Kael didn't attend the execution. He spent that morning in the medical suite instead, laying on an exam table while Dr. Amara Chen, Omega specialist, Riven's personal hire, ran the ultrasound wand across his belly. Heartbeat is strong, Dr. Chen said, eyes on the monitor. Growth is right on track. How are you feeling? Tired, Kael admitted, but better than last week. The stress reduction helps. Your blood pressure is finally normalizing. She paused, adjusting the wand. Have you been sleeping? Kael hesitated. Some. Nightmares. Less than before. Dr. Chen nodded, making notes. That's progress. PTSD doesn't resolve overnight, especially with pregnancy hormones complicating things. But you're doing well, Kael, really well. The baby moved on screen, tiny fist curling, legs stretching, alive and healthy despite everything. Kael's chest tightened watching it. Can you tell the gender yet? He asked. Do you want to know? Kael stopped. I don't know. Dr. Chen smiled gently. That's okay, you have time to decide. She finished the exam, printed images, handed them to Kael with careful hands. Next appointment in 2 weeks. Call immediately if you have contractions, bleeding, or if something feels wrong. I will. Kael left the medical suite with ultrasound photos pressed against his chest, walking through hallways that felt less hostile now. Riven's guards nodded respectfully as he passed. No smirks, no whispers, just acknowledgement. He'd become the Enigma's husband in truth, not just on paper. That still felt surreal. Back in the penthouse, Kael found Riven standing by the windows, phone in hand, expression unreadable. He looked up when Kael entered. How was the appointment? Good, baby's healthy. Kael held out the photos. Riven took them carefully, studying the grainy images like they were battle plans. His expression softened, barely, just enough to notice. Strong heartbeat, he murmured. Dr. Chen said everything's on track. Good. They stood in silence for a moment, comfortable silence. Strange how quickly Kael had learned Riven's moods, the difference between dangerous quiet and peaceful quiet, between calculation and rest. It's done, Riven said finally. Kael didn't need to ask what, how. Firing squad, Brask territory, witnessed by every syndicate head on the eastern seaboard. Riven set the photos down carefully. Darius made a speech about honor and consequences, very dramatic. Did he mention the other Omegas? No, that would require admitting culpability. Riven's jaw tightened, but the federal case is moving forward. Silas's crimes are public record now. Darius can't bury that. Kael moved to the couch, sinking down, exhaustion hitting suddenly. The baby kicked, active today, rolling and stretching like it had too much energy. I thought I'd feel something, Kael said quietly. Relief maybe, or closure, but I just feel. It's numb. Yeah. Riven crossed the room, sitting beside him. Not close enough to crowd, but close enough to matter. Silas hurt you for months. Healing doesn't happen the day he dies. I know, Kael's voice cracked. I wanted it to be over. The threat is over, the healing takes longer. Kael leaned back against the couch, hands pressed over his belly. Did you ever heal from whoever tried to kill you? Riven was quiet for a long time. I learned to carry it differently. That's not the same thing. No, it's not. They sat together in the afternoon light, two people carrying damage neither could fully shed, trying to build something stable on unstable ground. I have something for you, Riven said eventually. He stood, moving to the desk, returning with a folder. Legal documents, official seals. Kael's heart sank. What is this? Adoption papers. Kael froze. What? For the baby, Riven clarified. Legal claim, my name on the birth certificate, full parental rights. He paused. If you want that. Kael stared at him. You're asking. Yes. It's not demanding. No. Kael took the folder with shaking hands, scanning the documents. Everything was prepared, official, just waiting for signatures. Why? Kael asked. Because that child deserves a father who chooses to be present, Riven said quietly. Not one who denies them, not one who sees them as a mistake. Kael's eyes burned. He blinked hard, fighting tears that came anyway. I can't just, words failed. His hands pressed over his belly where the baby kicked steady patterns. This is too much. It's a choice, Riven said, not an obligation. If you'd rather wait, or if you want to name someone else, or if... No one else wants this baby, Kael interrupted, voice raw. No one else has ever, he broke off, throat closing. Riven knelt in front of him again, meeting his eyes with that steady silver-grey gaze. I want this child, Riven said, not because of politics or strategy or obligation, because they're yours, because they survived alongside you, because that makes them worth protecting. Kael couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The kindness was overwhelming, terrifying, everything he'd never had and didn't know how to accept. I'm scared, Kael whispered. Of me. Of believing you. Riven's expression softened. Then don't believe me yet. Watch, wait, decide when you're ready. He stood, leaving the folder on the couch beside Kael, giving him space to process. Kael sat alone with the papers and the ultrasound photos and the impossible choice between fear and hope. Outside, the city moved on. Silas was dead, the Brasks were broken. Justice had been served in the only way the underworld understood. But inside the penthouse, Kael faced a different kind of reckoning. Whether to let someone choose him. Not out of duty. Not out of strategy. Just because he was worth choosing. 2 weeks later, Kael signed the papers at 3 in the morning while Riven slept. The contractions started at 7 months and 3 weeks. Too early, too fast, too wrong. Kael woke gasping, pain ripping through his lower back and abdomen like something vital was tearing loose. His hands flew to his belly, finding it hard and tight and wrong. Riven, he managed, voice thin, desperate. Riven was up instantly, moving from the other side of the bed to Kael's side in seconds. No hesitation, no confusion. Just immediate focus. Talk to me. Contractions, they won't stop. Another wave hit. Kael curled forward, breathing through his teeth, trying to remember what Dr. Chen had said about early labor. Riven's hand pressed against Kael's belly, feeling the tightness, the wrong rhythm. His expression shifted, calm to something colder, more controlled. Controlled panic. How long? Started maybe 10 minutes ago. They're close together, too close. Riven was already moving, grabbing his phone, hitting speed dial. Dr. Chen, emergency, early contractions, 7 weeks premature, frequent and strong. He listened briefly. Understood, we're moving now. He hung up, turning back to Kael. Can you walk? I don't know. I've got you. Riven lifted him, just scooped him up like Kael weighed nothing, like 6 months of pregnancy and fear and trauma could be carried without effort. Kael's arms locked around Riven's neck. Another contraction hitting mid-movement. Breathe, Riven said quietly, in through your nose. Kael tried, failed, gasped instead. They moved through the penthouse fast, Riven's steps sure and steady despite the weight, despite the emergency. Guards appeared in the hallway, parting automatically, one already calling for the car. The elevator descent felt endless. Kael counted contractions, 4 in 3 minutes, way too many, his body trying to expel the baby weeks before it was safe. Stay with me, Riven murmured against his hair. I'm trying. I know. The car was waiting, engine running, back door open. Riven slid inside with Kael still in his arms, not bothering with seats or seatbelts, just holding him steady as the driver floored it. Kael pressed his face against Riven's shoulder, breathing in expensive cologne and something underneath that smelled like safety. His hands stayed locked over his belly, feeling the baby move between contractions, still alive, still fighting. Please don't take them yet, Kael whispered, to his body, to the universe, to whatever decided these things. Please, just a few more weeks. Riven's arms tightened around him. Dr. Chen is the best, she'll stop this. What if she can't? She will. The certainty in his voice was almost convincing. The hospital appeared too slowly and too fast both. Private entrance. Medical team waiting. Dr. Chen in scrubs looking calm and competent, and exactly what Kael needed. Exam room 3, she directed. Now. Riven carried Kael inside, setting him carefully on the bed. Nurses swarmed immediately, vitals, monitors, IV lines sliding into his arm with practiced efficiency. Contraction, Kael gasped. Dr. Chen's hands pressed against his belly, timing, assessing. 30 seconds apart, that's too frequent. She looked up at the nurses. Magnesium sulfate, 0.2 milligrams per minute, and get me the steroid injections for fetal lung development. Things moved fast after that. Medication flowing through the IV, making Kael's head swim and his muscles relax slightly. The contractions didn't stop, but they slowed, 45 seconds apart, then a minute. Talk to me about stress, Dr. Chen said, eyes on the monitors. Anything new, changes in routine, emotional triggers. Kael's mind raced backward, the adoption papers, Silas's execution, the constant awareness that he was married to someone powerful and dangerous and protective in ways that still terrified him. Everything, Kael said weakly. Dr. Chen's expression softened. PTSD and pregnancy don't mix well. Your body's been in survival mode for months. Sometimes it decides survival means delivering early. But the baby needs more time, I know. She adjusted the IV, that's what we're fighting for. Another contraction. Kael gritted his teeth through it, hands white-knuckled on the bed rails. Riven appeared beside him, fingers closing over Kael's with firm pressure, not controlling, grounding. You're not alone, Riven said quietly. Kael's vision blurred, he nodded, unable to speak. Hours passed, medication adjustments, contractions spacing out slowly, 2 minutes 3-5. Dr. Chen checked the baby's heartbeat constantly, frowning at numbers Kael couldn't interpret. The baby's stressed, she said finally, heart rate dropping during contractions, not critical yet but close. What does that mean? Kael asked. It means if the contractions don't stop in the next hour, we might need to deliver. But you said the baby needs more time. The baby needs to be alive more than it needs to be full term, Dr. Chen said gently. We're monitoring. If things stabilize, you stay pregnant. If they don't. Then what? Emergency C-section, at 7 months. With NICU support and steroid injections, survival rates are good. Not perfect, but good. Kael's hands pressed over his belly where the baby moved weakly between contractions. Too quiet, too still. Fight, he whispered, please fight. Riven's hand tightened on his. They're fighting, so are you. Time became meaningless. Just contractions and monitors, and the steady rhythm of Riven's breathing beside him, refusing to leave even when Dr. Chen suggested he wait outside. I'm staying, Riven had said, flat, final. She hadn't argued. At hour 4 something shifted. The contractions spaced to 7 minutes. The baby's heart rate stabilized. Dr. Chen's expression cautiously optimistic. Keep going, she murmured, adjusting monitors. You're doing it. At hour 6, contractions hit 10 minutes apart. At hour 8, they stopped entirely. Kael collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted and shaking and still pregnant. You did it, Dr. Chen said, smiling for the first time all night. Crisis averted, for now. For now, Kael's voice cracked. You're on bed rest for the next 2 weeks minimum. No stress, no walking unless necessary. I'm prescribing medication to keep contractions suppressed. She paused. This was a warning, Kael. Your body can't handle much more. If you want this baby to make it to full term, you have to rest. Kael nodded weakly. Okay. I mean it, no exceptions. I understand. Dr. Chen left to arrange the discharge paperwork. The nurses filtered out. Eventually, it was just Kael and Riven in the quiet exam room, monitors beeping steadily, proof that both he and the baby were still alive. Thank you, Kael whispered. Riven looked at him. For what? Staying. Where else would I be? Kael's eyes burned. He blinked hard, fighting exhaustion and emotion both. I don't know. Anywhere. You could have sent guards, could have handled it from a distance. You're my husband, Riven said simply. That's my child. Distance wasn't an option. My child. Not biologically, not genetically, but claimed anyway with the same certainty Riven brought to everything. Kael's hands pressed over his belly where the baby kicked once, gentle, tired, alive. We almost lost them, Kael said quietly. But we didn't. Next time. There won't be a next time, you're resting, I'll make sure of it. Kael almost smiled. You can't control everything. Watch me. And for the next 2 weeks, Riven proved him wrong. The baby was born on a Tuesday at 9 months exactly. No complications, no emergencies, just careful monitoring and a planned delivery that went exactly as Dr. Chen had outlined. Kael had been terrified anyway. He'd spent the entire labor gripping Riven's hand, breathing through contractions that felt like his body was splitting apart, convinced something would go wrong at the last second. Nothing did. At 4:47 p.m., Dr. Chen placed a tiny, screaming, perfect baby in Kael's arms. Healthy, she said, smiling wide, all fingers and toes, strong lungs, congratulations. Kael couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, just stared at the small face, eyes squeezed shut, fists waving furiously at the injustice of being born. 7 pounds 3 ounces, a nurse called out. Enigma Omega hybrid, Dr. Chen added quietly. Rare, beautiful. Kael's eyes burned, tears spilled over before he could stop them, dripping onto the baby's forehead. He wiped them away carefully, hands shaking, unable to process that this was real. This life, this child, his. Do you want to hold them? Kael asked, looking up at Riven. Riven had been silent through the entire delivery, standing beside the bed, presence steady and grounding. Now he moved closer, silver-grey eyes fixed on the baby with an expression Kael had never seen before. Wonder. Yes, Riven said quietly. Kael passed the baby over carefully, watched Riven cradle them with surprising gentleness, large hands supporting the tiny head, eyes scanning every feature like he was memorizing them. Hello, Riven murmured, I'm your father. Not biologically, not by blood. By choice. Kael's chest cracked open. He pressed his hand over his mouth, trying to contain the sob building in his throat. What's their name? Dr. Chen asked. Kael and Riven looked at each other. They discussed this, late nights when Kael couldn't sleep. Early mornings when the baby kicked too hard. They'd narrowed it down but never committed. Zion, Kael said, Riven Calder. Riven's expression softened. Perfect. The nurses finished the checks, cleaned Zion carefully, wrapped him in a soft blanket and handed him back to Kael. We'll give you privacy, Dr. Chen said, herding her staff toward the door. Call if you need anything. Then it was just the three of them, Kael exhausted and aching and more complete than he'd ever felt. Riven standing beside the bed, one hand resting on Kael's shoulder. Zion sleeping peacefully, tiny chest rising and falling with steady breaths. I didn't think this was possible, Kael admitted quietly. Being here, being safe, having someone who, his voice broke. Who chose you? Riven finished. Yeah. Riven sat carefully on the edge of the bed, close enough that their shoulders touched. I told you once that I chose you because you survived. I meant it, but it's more than that now. Kael looked at him. What is it? You're kind despite everything that taught you to be cruel. You're strong without needing to prove it. You protect what matters even when it costs you, Riven finished softly, voice rough in a way Kael had never heard before. And you did it without anyone cheering for you. That kind of courage, it changes the people around it. Kael stared at him, exhausted and overwhelmed, Zion's warmth anchoring him to the bed like gravity. The baby, his baby, slept with one tiny fist tucked beneath his chin, mouth making faint, instinctive motions like he was still deciding whether the world was worth staying in. Kael let out a shaky laugh that sounded more like a sob. I wasn't brave, he whispered. I was terrified, I just didn't have another option. Riven's hand slid from Kael's shoulder to his forearm, a steady weight. Bravery is fear with a choice attached to it, he said. You chose him, every day. Kael swallowed hard, and you chose us. Riven's gaze dropped to Zion. For a moment, the Enigma King, the man feared across the eastern seaboard, the man whose name made other syndicates go quiet, looked almost human, like the power in his bones had finally found something worth softening for. I chose you the moment I saw the Brasks treat you like a problem they could throw away, Riven admitted, but I didn't understand the depth of what they did until I watched you flinch at kindness, until I watched you apologize for needing food, until I watched you wake up from nightmares and scan the room like you were still in a basement. Kael's throat tightened. Riven exhaled slowly, as if speaking the next part cost him something. I used you at first, he said. For proof, for strategy, for timing, I won't pretend otherwise. Kael's fingers curled instinctively around the blanket. A flicker of old fear rose, sharp, familiar. But, Riven continued, voice steady, I stopped the moment I realized you weren't a chess piece. You were a person who had already paid more than anyone should ever pay for someone else's cowardice. Kael searched his face for the usual tell, deception, manipulation, a hook. He found none, just truth, clean and blunt, the way Riven always delivered it. You could have walked away after Silas died, Kael whispered. Riven's mouth barely curved, and leave you alone with a newborn, in a world where people would still see you as expendable. No. You don't even like children, Kael murmured, remembering the rumors. The Enigma king who didn't do softness, the syndicate head who didn't do family, the man who treated life like a ledger. Riven looked at Zion again. I don't like most people, he corrected. Kael snorted wetly, then hissed, because laughing hurt right now. Riven's thumb brushed lightly over Kael's arm. You're going to rest, he said. You're going to heal. You're going to learn what a calm life feels like, even if we have to build it in the middle of chaos. Kael blinked slowly. Is that even possible? It is if I decide it is. Kael should have rolled his eyes at that. He almost did. But he'd watched this man bend an entire underworld into consequences with nothing but receipts and timing. He'd watched alphas kneel without being touched. He'd watched Riven turn cruelty into exposure, and exposure into collapse. Riven didn't make promises casually. Kael looked down at Zion, then up again. When I was with the Brasks, he said quietly, I used to think if I just worked harder, stayed quieter, made myself more useful, they wouldn't hurt me. Riven's expression darkened. Kael continued, voice trembling, and when Silas denied the pregnancy, I thought maybe I deserved it. Maybe I made myself easy to throw away. Riven's hand tightened, not painfully, but firmly, like a line drawn in stone. No, he said, one syllable, absolute. Kael's eyes burned. I know that now, he whispered, but it took too long to learn. It takes as long as it takes, Riven said, and his voice softened again. The lesson isn't late if you're still alive to learn it. Zion stirred, making a small, complaining noise. Kael instinctively rocked him, the way the nurse had shown him. The baby settled, fingers opening and closing like he was gripping an invisible thread. Kael glanced at Riven. Do you want to try? He asked carefully. Riven hesitated, just a fraction. Not fear, not uncertainty. More like reverence, like he understood how delicate this moment was. Then he nodded and held his arms out. Kael transferred Zion into them slowly, watching for any stiffness, any discomfort. But Riven cradled the baby like he'd been born knowing how. Zion's tiny head fit against his forearm. Riven's big hands supported his back with impossible gentleness. Zion's eyes fluttered open, dark, intelligent, too aware for a newborn. He stared up at Riven for 2 long seconds. Then he yawned. Kael laughed quietly again. He's judging you. Riven's mouth curved. Good, he should. Kael watched them together, and something in his chest loosened, something he hadn't realized was clenched for years. I never had a father like that, Kael said. Someone who stays, someone who chooses. Riven looked at him, gaze steady. Then he will, he said simply. A knock came softly at the door. Riven's entire body shifted, Enigma alertness, sharp and immediate. Kael's heart jumped in reflex, old fear flaring. Even here, even now, danger had trained them. The door opened slowly, and Dr. Chen stepped in with a careful smile. Sorry to interrupt, she said quietly. Just a quick check, then I'll let you bond. Kael nodded, swallowing the spike of anxiety. Dr. Chen moved with quiet efficiency, checked Kael's vitals, adjusted his IV, reviewed Zion's chart. All good, she said. He's strong. You did great, Kael. Kael nodded, thank you. Dr. Chen's gaze flicked to Riven, brief, professional. And you, she added, you did something most powerful men never manage. You made the room feel safe. Riven didn't react outwardly, but Kael saw the subtle shift in his eyes, like the words landed deeper than he wanted to admit. Dr. Chen stepped back. I'll have the nurse bring the discharge plan tomorrow. No visitors without clearance. Her eyes met Kael, gently. No stress, no surprises. Your nervous system has had enough for one lifetime. Kael exhaled, agreed. When she left, quiet filled the room again. Kael's gaze dropped to Zion in Riven's arms. So what happens now? He asked. Riven looked out the window, toward the city beyond the hospital. Now, he said, we rebuild. Kael's brow furrowed. Rebuild what? Your sense of safety, Riven said first. Your life, your family. and the underworld's understanding of what happens when someone preys on the vulnerable. Kael's throat tightened. You're going to keep going after them. Not like this, Riven said. Not with blood. He paused. Silas was a symptom. Men like him grow in systems where denial has no consequence. Kael stared at him. You're talking like a reformer. Riven's mouth twitched. Don't insult me. Kael laughed under his breath. Riven continued, voice calm but deadly serious. I won't become a saint. I'm not interested in moral purity. I'm interested in stability. His gaze returned to Zion, and stability requires rules that are enforced. Kael swallowed. What kind of rules? Riven spoke plainly, like he'd already mapped this out. Any syndicate under my influence will be required to register bonds, heat protection contracts, pregnancy responsibility clauses, financial support for omegas and pups. Denial becomes a punishable offense. Kael blinked, stunned. You can do that. I can if I make it more expensive not to, Riven said. That's how underworld law works. Pressure, incentives, consequences. Kael's eyes strung again. You're doing that because of me. Riven looked at him. I'm doing it because of what I saw, he corrected. You were strong enough to survive anyway. Most won't be. Kael nodded slowly. That matters. Riven's gaze softened a fraction. Yes, he said, it does. Zion made another small sound, squirming. Riven adjusted him instinctively. Kael watched the movement, careful, automatic, protective, and felt something settle in his chest like a decision. Kael reached over, covering Riven's hand briefly with his own. You said once you couldn't promise I'd never be hurt, he said quietly. Riven's eyes locked on his. Kael's voice trembled, but you promised I'd never be discarded. Riven nodded once. I did. Kael swallowed. The words that came next felt like stepping off a ledge and trusting the ground would appear. Then I'm going to stop living like I'm waiting for the rug to get pulled, Kael whispered. I don't know how to do it fast, but I want to try. Riven's gaze didn't waver. That's enough. Kael let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding since the day Silas denied him. A breath that felt like grief leaving the body. They stayed like that for a long time, Kael holding Zion for a while, then Riven, then Kael again, passing the baby back and forth as if the motion itself was teaching Kael something his nervous system had forgotten, that love could be safe and safety could be real. The weeks that followed weren't perfect. Kael still woke sometimes, heart pounding, expecting a locked door and a basement ceiling. He still flinched at sudden noises. He still checked Zion's breathing too often, because trauma doesn't vanish just because the danger ended. But each time Kael woke, Riven was there, not hovering, not controlling, just present. Sometimes he didn't speak. He just put a hand over Kael's wrist and waited until Kael's pulse slowed. Sometimes Zion was the anchor, tiny fingers curling around Kael's thumb, reminding him with soft weight that the present was real. And little by little, the fear stopped being the only thing Kael could feel. 3 months after Zion's birth, Kael stood in the Calder Syndicate's main hall, an intimidating chamber where deals were made and lives were traded. Kael had never belonged in a place like this. But he wasn't here as property. He was here as the husband of the Enigma sovereign and the father of Zion Calder. Riven stood beside him, dressed in black, expression calm. The room was full of alphas, betas, and enigmas from allied networks, men who would have dismissed Kael once as Brask trash. They didn't dismiss him now. Not with Zion in Kael's arms, watching them all with those two aware eyes. Riven didn't announce a war. He announced terms. Denial will no longer be tolerated, Riven said, voice quiet but carrying. Any bonded omega under my umbrella will have registered protections. Any pup conceived will have guaranteed support. Any alpha who breaks that, who discards what they helped create, will lose territory, resources, and status, permanently. A ripple moved through the room. Some faces tightened with resistance. Others softened with something like relief. Kael felt it the moment the system changed, not because it suddenly became kind, but because it became accountable. Riven looked down at Kael for half a heartbeat, a silent check-in. Kael nodded once. And for the first time in Kael's life, he didn't feel like a passenger in someone else's decision. He felt like a person who had survived long enough to help shape the rules. That night, back in the penthouse, Kael rocked Zion near the windows, where the first bullet had shattered the glass months earlier. The city lights glittered below like nothing had ever happened. Riven stood behind Kael, arms loosely around his waist, not trapping, not claiming, just holding. Kael stared out at the skyline and said, very quietly, "I used to think power meant never being afraid." Riven's breath warmed his hair. Power is being afraid and still choosing the right thing. Kael swallowed, "Then I guess I'm learning power." Riven's mouth brushed the side of Kael's head, gentle, respectful. "You've been powerful the whole time," he murmured. "You just didn't have anyone willing to call it by its name." Zion yawned loudly, then hiccuped. Kael laughed, the sound real and surprised. Riven's arms tightened slightly. "There," he said, almost amused. That's the life I'm building." Kael turned his head just enough to look at him. "For us." "For you," Riven corrected. "For him, and for anyone who thinks they can be thrown away." Kael's eyes strung again, but this time the tears didn't feel like pain. They felt like release. And if you take anything from Kael's story, if you're listening from a place where you've ever felt disposable, or used, or denied, let it be this. You are not weak because you needed help. You are not worthless because someone failed you. You are not too much because you needed care. The right kind of power doesn't crush you. It protects you long enough for you to remember who you were before the world tried to break you. Kael didn't win because he became ruthless. He won because he refused to let cruelty rewrite his worth. And Riven, Enigma, king, Mafia sovereign, proved something the underworld had forgotten. Dominance without responsibility is just cowardice wearing a crown. Riven Calder slept safely in his father's arms that night. Not because the world got kinder, but because someone finally decided it would be accountable. And sometimes that decision is the beginning of everything.